Welcome back to another episode of Better Life Conversations. This is actually a continuation of a previous conversation I had with pastor and author Ron Fandrick and our friend Cindy Chamberlain Eastwood, as we are talking about the things we don't talk about. We're talking about judging. We're talking about having a framework to deal with issues for which maybe we don't currently have a good set of tools. And for those who know me, you know that I love tools. Anything I can that I can use to be more prepared for a situation that may be unexpected is a very good thing. So Cindy and Ron, thank you so much for rejoining me for a continuation of this very maybe challenging but also hopeful and helpful conversation about how God has provided us with a system to help one another, to guide one another, to have voices that can speak into issues with experience and with fairness and all those other attributes that God gives for those who are willing to serve in that way. So thank you for joining me again.
Let's dig in.
Well,
Go
it's a hard topic. I'm thinking maybe we should have just brought him a tool belt instead. He likes tools.
Right.
Because no one likes judging. I mean, I wouldn't dare say it to my kids, and, time to judge you.
Yeah.
I mean, they'd just lock me up, and we don't judge. We don't want to talk about hard topics. And yet our court systems are full, 3 or 4 years out just to get anything. There's got to be a better way, right?
Yeah.
So how'd you handle it as a mother when your little ones were only about that size?
Well, and they turned out great, too. They
Right.
did. I've got one that's a pilot, a Top Gun guy, and another that's working in a counseling firm. I mean, but they were all different.
Yeah.
One of them would need a spanking. One of them you couldn't spank. He was crushed if you just said, please, would you please do it differently?
Yeah.
And they were all different. Discipline meant different things to each child. Every child had a different view of discipline. And
you're
it meant
saying
different things.
You worked off of what you saw in each one of them, and you worked off of the way your mother raised you. And she obviously did a fantastic job. And so that's the same thing we're talking about here.
It meant knowing them.
Huh?
It meant knowing my kids.
Right.
It meant knowing every piece of who they were.
And nobody knows this better than God.
Yeah, that's true.
So we look at the Bible and we see, how does God look at me? And how do I then serve others the way Jesus served me? And that's what Jesus talked about in John chapter 15, verse 12.
So
love one another even as I have loved you.
So judging can be a form of knowing someone. Even.
Know them, love them.
It's such a different concept
and
in our
help
world.
them. And you help them stay away from sin.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we're talking about church judges again.
Yeah.
We had an interesting conversation, but I came away from it feeling like I still didn't have the tools. How do I make this practical for my own life, for my own church, for my own community? So one of the questions I wanted to start with was more specific to a church community where church structure, you have a pastor, you have elders, but we don't, again, you probably don't have to look very far within your own church to see where there have been issues for which your church community has not been prepared. And you start to maybe see a couple of cracks in the system or something that seems like it should have been fairly easy to be dealt with, lingered on and on and on. So my initial question is, what is the relationship between church judges and church leadership?
Okay, well, go back to Moses, how he set it up in Exodus chapter 18, verse 21. And he was instructed to find quality men. We talked about that last time, that feared God, that were mighty, strong, very capable men, and hated unjust gain. So working with that quality individual who knows God and knows the first thing they do is always go to God because he's the one who has the answer. With that mindset then, they set up a system of church judges. And what he did was he set up a hierarchy where the top one was a person that was over 1,000 people and over 100 judges. Then the second level was over 50 judges. 50 people and 5 judges. And then at the bottom, we're over 10 people. And I just kind of drool when I hear that. I say, if my span of responsibility was only 10 people and I did that all the time, do you know how well I could get to know those people?
Wow.
I could talk to one of them every day. I could have time to spend 3-4 hours a day if somebody had a hard time figuring out how do I apply God's word here to my life. I could take all that time to do that. As a therapist, I'm only with somebody an hour and a half once a week, and that's it. Oh, that would be so wonderful to have that small of span of responsibility to work with them intimately. But that's the way God set that up. And what would you do? I say, church, just do the same thing.
Well,
but we would have to be training church judges in order to be able to do that.
Right.
We would need to pray to the Lord to send us the quality person that can handle that kind of responsibility.
So the picture you're painting for me right now is very different than the picture I have in my mind of what a church judge is. You know, I'm picturing somebody wearing a black robe and holding a gavel. But what you're talking about is relationship. It's not somebody who's looking down at you. It's kind of like the proverbial picture of God some of us have, of this kind of a tyrant in the sky who is watching for the mistakes and ready to just point out and zap you if you can. And I know that's a lot of hyperbole, but isn't that how we sometimes treat God? That he's there to just keep us in line, and if he needs to bruise us a little bit to get us there, that's all fine and good, which perhaps he does sometimes. But the God I believe in is a relational God who loves us and wants what's best for us. So within that context, what is a church judge relationally?
I got a good example here. Cindy, you've watched me for a long time work. How is that vision different than what he is talking about, a vision people might have because they have a secular vision?
Well,
but you know me.
What Ron does at church, he's usually at his church like the last to leave. He takes that time almost as a holy time just to talk to God's people. And I know that his commitment is he literally talks to the person in front of him. He doesn't look at the clock. He doesn't look at anyone else. Whoever comes to him to talk, he feels they've been sent by God. And I've seen my own mother go and talk and just need to talk. And he just literally ministers to the person right in front of him, face to face. Like there's no other thing he has in his whole week. And I know he does, but he just literally uses that relational time. And I think that probably a quality of beyond being people of integrity, they would need to be people that are really invested in emotional, relational, spiritual building guidance in that way. And that's really what he's talking about. So obviously these are people not just coming in for a minute and checking in and out. These are people really invested in the congregation, really wanting to know the kids, you know, when they come home from college, or know the families, and be very involved with the practical pieces.
That kind of love is more than just for a church judge. Every member in the congregation
That's
can
beautiful.
do it. Yeah. And that's what I teach people. Take the time, talk to people, look at them in their eyes, use your soft eyes that care for them, and just stay with them as long as they need. Some people will talk to you for 30 seconds and they're gone. Some people need to talk longer. And care about them and be inside of them, join with them, live with them, because that's the way Jesus lives with me and you and
That's
you.
right. Yeah, and this is an interesting, not a side topic, but one of the challenges we have now in our busy society, or distracted, maybe that's even more of an issue than the busyness. You know, if we're you know, right now, if I while I'm talking to you guys, pulled my phone out of my pocket, and
Yeah.
we do these cues that tell people whether or not we value them.
Yes.
And
yes.
and how do we support one another if we're being called as judges who aren't judging the people, they're looking at the situation and resourcing people, right?
Yes.
You're hitting the words. You're right onto it.
If we're doing that, then that takes what you're talking about. It
Yeah.
takes a focus and just really a hyper focus on relationship, basically treating others the way Jesus treats us.
Sounds like a commandment.
It really does sound like a commandment. So let me ask the hard question then. So we know what we're called to be. We're supposed to love people like Jesus loves us.
Yes.
We're supposed to share Jesus with other people, both in words, but also in how we treat them. What happens when that trust is broken? What happens, and we'll be talking about it, and we have talked about this in the past, Cindy, the very people who we may view as the judges, as the leaders, what happens when they break that trust? What happens if a pastor is involved in some form of abuse? Something significant that breaks all that trust and can shatter a church or community or a person. How does this fit into that? Because that, to me, that's where everything does tend to fall apart. And a church, a community can just be destroyed by the misbehaviors, by the mistakes of those leaders. Are there some biblical examples of how that was dealt with?
The one you brought up is David, King David. People just trusted him. They came to him and said, want you to be the king. He built up the kingdom, the biggest that it had ever been, except for his son, Solomon, who expanded it even further. And all of a sudden, guess what? He's got a problem.
Yeah.
People didn't know what it was until Nathan came to David and said, you're the man. You're the one that murdered the man that should not have been murdered. You're the one that took his wife, and you don't take another's wife. He was broken after that. But what did he do? He confessed his sin. Look at Psalm 51, one of the most beautiful psalms that there are. And he confessed that sin to God. He repented of that sin. God punished him. Their baby died. God didn't stop that. But God restored him, and he never took away his title of being the man after God's own heart.
Yes.
So people could see that even King David was confessing his sin to the Lord. And hopefully that would be an example to them that they could do the same thing when they sin. And he pointed out their sin to them because he was the church judge. So I say, well, that's the way you do that. Be just totally honest to God, honest to yourself, honest to the people, and let them see that.
But confession, you just hit on it. It wasn't that in any way that David did what leaders might do today. Certainly we've seen televangelists and stuff that they just pretend they haven't sinned. David was open that he was repentant. He was open that he had harmed a family. He was open that he had sinned and transgressed against God, which is why God could work in that situation. So I think in our culture, it's allowing people to realize we're not looking for pageantry, we're looking for authenticity. We're not looking for leaders that hide and whitewash things, but we're looking for leaders that are repentant.
Right.
And open, if it's an open sin, they need to also be openly repentant.
Yeah. And that, I hear you, Cindy. One of the challenges that we see in the secular world, as well as our world of spiritual communities, when people don't respond, the word I'm thinking of when you are talking about this is humility. When people don't respond that way, we don't seem to have a system in place on how to deal with that. You know, we again, we can see that at the church level, in our church structure, the conference level. Something happens somewhere, and instead of having the tools to deal with it, we just, I don't know, we just don't know how to deal with it.
Talking about a tool, that brings up the sixth book that I wrote. It's called Life Anew. And in that, I combine scripture with the therapy that I have done. And people can work through that to improve themselves, and then I put that into a group of believers, and they support one another as they go through that. So that gives them the chance to be honest with themselves, to be honest with one another, say, hey, I'm working on this issue, I'm wanting to accomplish these things, I have to get past these hurdles here, and share that with other people, so that first of all they see you are authentic, you are transparent, you're facing those problems, and here I thought, no, you're the pastor, you're an elder, you're one of the big leaders. You make things happen in the church, and you have these issues too, like me. Right. Well, if you do, I can do the same thing too. And we can go to the Lord together.
Right.
And we can lift up one another and say, I'm with you. In fact, I've learned that that's one of the best things I can do. The first times, I had funerals that I had to conduct, I would go, well, what do I do? What do I say to the people? My wife is really good at that. Getting and joining people who somebody died. She's really good at being with them and learning about them and what's happening to them and set them at ease. And that was one thing I had to learn. And the other kind of like it is, especially if I get a man in therapy and he'd start crying, I go, what do I do with this? A man is crying, and I've learned I just say, I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm with you. And that means everything to them, because nobody would ever tell them that. So it's not complicated. It's that simple.
Yeah, again, I love that transparency, the emotional component, because that's exactly what Jesus does with us. We all have our issues, and so often we just feel alone in that. We feel like we can't share. How often do we go to church and it feels like everybody is kind of doing their own version of I'm fine, just fine. And they're not, because they're human just like you. And you had a really, really rough week. And you come to church and you listen to the message, and sometimes I'm afraid we go home just as alone as we were when we came into church that morning.
We had that happen this last week. For some reason, I went exercising like I usually do, but man, was I in pain. And I had a hard time trying to sleep that night. I was in so much pain. So the next day I had to lead the prayer group. And so the first people came in, and one guy says, well, how are you? And instead of saying fine, I said, I am hurting. I have been hurting all last night. I'm hurting all this morning, and I can hardly move. And toward the end of the prayer meeting, the pastor says, and I want to pray for Pastor Ron so that you would heal him. And I go, he took what he heard and he put it in the actual prayers, because I never asked for anybody to pray for me. But that is what you're talking about, is the difference, to be in tune with somebody, to their need, and then address it right then and there.
Yeah. So maybe it feels like we're broadening the topic a little bit, that perhaps a church judge is somebody who God has put in a position through whatever the system is to have some level of authority within the church, within the community. But at a broader level, we are all called to be this type of person that others can come to be this type of person that listens, that engages, that doesn't shy away from the hard things, or, it is humble enough to say, well, I don't know, let's pray our way through this. Or I know that Cindy dealt with something similar to this. Can I put you in contact with my friend Cindy, who might be able to? And then through community, we learn to support one another better, the way God models and asks us to do.
Yeah, there's a lot there. In fact, I had a situation where the two church leaders were conflicting with one another, and so they asked me to come in and meet with them. I said, let me meet with each one of them alone, because I wanted to get down to the depth of what's going on. And when I met with the one lady, I found out she had managerial skills, she was very intelligent, she loved the Lord, and that wasn't the problem. When I got down to the depths, the problem was she was abused by her husband. And when this other woman started arguing with her, it reminded her of her husband. She was fighting against her husband. She wasn't fighting against that other person. I would have never known that unless I was able to get into therapy and get down to the depth of it. And I don't think she would have known it either, but it brought it out. And so I'm hoping that opened up her eyes that you don't need to war against your, in this case, boss, because she worked for her. Rather, take care of that problem first, and then Jesus will give you the strength to overcome that. And then when that happens, you can come back and love her. And she needed some love too, because she wasn't listening to you. She was going, oh, you're revolting against me. No, that wasn't the problem. She thought she was having a war against her husband. And the other woman thought she was just talking about intellectual things, and she didn't realize how much she hurt this woman.
Right.
But that's what it takes, is to communicate with one another. I tell people, just don't say something, rather give them a background of what you're talking about. I've learned a lot of that from my wife. She'll say something and I'll react to the emotion with which she says it. But after I've learned she's not coming after me.
Yeah.
For example, say, oh, the dishwasher needs to be unloaded. I'm going, you think I'm so stupid that I can't read the sign? And then I've learned she's not talking about how stupid I am or how lazy I am. She just wants to assure that we get it done.
Yeah.
And usually I have to say, thank you for reminding me, because I had 5 other jobs I had to do. I would have forgotten that.
Right.
So I just thank her. And guess what? We don't have a problem. There's no conflict, because I'm understanding where she's coming from, she's understanding where I'm at. So it just takes that extra communication. And I'll say, well, the reason I'm sharing this with you is because I want to accomplish this. And so then the words don't sound like they're harsh. They actually, you realize they're coming out of love.
Right.
And that communication makes all the difference.
Yeah, all the difference at all. I mean, I hear you. I tend to be very reactive to tones and other things, and I read things in, and it drives me nuts, and I'm sure it drives people around me nuts that they're not intending to say anything that's going to trigger me or whatever else, and then there I go. I guess on the good side is it gives me the opportunity to practice being humble and coming back and apologizing and whatnot. So in the last few minutes we have, what are some, I still feel like I could use a few more tools. We don't all have these resources in our churches and our communities. You're a therapist. You are able to provide that role within your community. What are some things that people can do to create that space within their own area, within their own community, within their own life?
Well, the books that I have written are available.
Okay.
You can go to any Christian bookstore, you can go to any store, and they can look it up and they can get it. So that's an easy access there.
And we'll put those on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have,
Maya.
there are books, there are conferences. In our last episode, you mentioned going to the Olympia Church up there in Washington.
Well, that was because a pastor asked me deliberately to come into
to
that
deal with
church.
an issue, or
Which is one thing I can do now. Since they had COVID, even the secular court shut down.
Yeah.
They didn't have people coming there. They conducted court over the internet. And I'm going, well, if they can conduct court over the internet, I can do the same thing. So now most of my people that I have for therapy, I do it over the internet. So from that perspective, I can talk to anybody in the United States. No
So
matter, you could be down here in Oregon, you could be on the East Coast somewhere. We could get on Skype and I can interact with you there. And of course, like if you had the book, or even if you had a group there doing the group process, I could be part of it and be like a consultant.
That's right.
And work with you. It's almost as good as being there. So that's an advantage the Lord's given us with this new electronic world we're in.
Right, right.
So if someone contacted you, you'd be willing? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, and that's a good thing. Anytime I feel like we have to create space, we need to pause and kind of take in the context of whatever is happening and have the wisdom to say, hey, we need to stop. And whether it's you or, let's maybe talk to our church leadership, or maybe there's somebody at the conference. What are some resources available to us? Maybe we need a mediator, just somebody who's outside of it a little bit, somebody we can all trust, and to help us go through this process so we're not just continuing this person against person. A lot of times, at least in my experience, you'll have a couple of really strong personalities within your church, within your community, and it feels like it's just turns into a brawl where a lot of the people decide to just walk away from it instead of using it as an opportunity to grow together again.
That's why I've gone to seminaries that I can get a hold of and say, consider my book, Life Anew. Either you can make a course out of it or you could do it on the side. But as you train your pastors, as you train your leaders, let them go through this process of being in the group, being honest and open and sharing with one another. That's something you can't get from a textbook.
That's right. That's right.
And that's something that pastors need, because that's the biggest problem you're going to face. Is not people are going to challenge you on how you exegete a passage. They're going to challenge you on how you handle interactions among the congregation.
Right.
And that's one way to learn it. And that kind of training is so important. So we need to be training the people at that level.
That's right.
Need to be training in your congregation people how to work with one another. And again, to be accepting of the leaders.
That's right.
To support the leaders, because they need you to be following them. And if you're doing something and it doesn't fit their situation, they need to be honest and tell you so they can modify
That's
it to
right.
fit yours.
That's right. Well, thank you again for joining me, Pastor Ron and Cindy. I really appreciate these opportunities to think about and tackle some of the issues that are facing us every day in our relationships with others, within our own families, our church communities, whatever the case. It's nice to know that there are tools available to us. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Absolutely.
Praise the Lord. Great,
Absolutely.
great chance.
And folks, I just want to encourage you, you may leave this episode with more questions than answers. That's okay. I'm actually in the same place. What it does is it plants a desire to learn more, to grow more, to expand my tool set so that as situations arise, instead of just leaving and disengaging, I can be prepared to learn more and to share, my own experiences and be willing to listen to other people. So as we face the challenges that today brings, realize that there are other people that are there to help you. You can help other people, and that God is with everybody if we will just lean into Him as we engage with each other. We'll see you on the next episode. Have a blessed day. Bye-bye.